Good afternoon, everybody. Here we are at last in the middle of this lecture cycle, The Foundations of Esotericism. I have written my own title in the book called Karma and Nirvana, Think, Say and Do. However, besides that, there are sort of three areas that I'd like to comment on. The one is this area of thinking, speaking and doing, and where we are in evolution with that and how that's come about. That's Steiner brings these three faculties as part of our journey in evolution in this central part of the world. I'd also like to talk about the karma that arises, or the concept of karma that arises out of what we do, what we say and what we think. And the third comment is this idea of what is a free deed. So in this lecture, Steiner really tries to work out the difference, or give us some indications out of Eastern esotericism and Western esotericism. Where does a free deed stem from, if at all possible, in relationship to what we think, say and do? So when we look at these things, again, we might just take a bit of a recap of where we stand in evolution. Remember, we have 7 stages of consciousness, big planetary evolution stages that Steiner calls Saturn, Sun, Moon, and we're in the 4th one called the Earth. And there'll be 3 future ones which come about after levels of transformation and the evolution of consciousness take place. In each of those, we have 7 kingdoms, which Rudolf Steiner in these lectures, so I'm bouncing around because I'm trying to find the page in the book, but in this particular book, he calls those, after the 7 planetary stages of consciousness, he calls them the 7 rounds, or the 7 conditions of life. So in our 4th stage, we have 7 conditions of life. So our Earth stage of consciousness, where we are developing our waking consciousness, has 7 conditions of life, and we are in the 4th one. And within the 4th stage, we have 7 conditions of form. And again, we are in the 4th condition of form. So if we add that all up, we are in the 25th stage of evolution, in the middle of 7 huge stages. One could say that we are actually right at the middle point of the whole evolution of consciousness that is our solar system, right from many thousands of millions of years ago. So when we look at that, we are in this 4th globe, or this 4th condition of form, and within that we have 7 evolutionary stages. What we could say is that the first round, or the first condition of life, is a recapitulation of what happened on ancient Saturn. The second round is a recapitulation of what happened in ancient Sun, and the third condition is the recapitulation of what happened in the 3rd major planetary evolution on the ancient Moon. And now we are in this 4th condition of life, the 4th round, which is really the beginning of the Earth proper. So the real physical material condition, where our journey into individuation by drawing veils over and around the physical condition of the human being, where we veil our consciousness of the spirit, starts in Earth proper. And the first 3 of those conditions of form are again a recapitulation of the Sun, the Saturn, the Sun and the Moon. And so we're really in the 4th stage. Where we're at is really only the kind of beginning of the Earth proper. And we have in this 7th condition, what we are is we have then our times that we become more familiar with. They each have 2,160 years. People may be familiar with the words Atlantis, which was the one previous to where we are. Atlantis, so to say, was the center of our whole earthly evolution of consciousness. And only the time before that in Lemuria, so we have Lemuria as the 3rd stage of our condition of form. Only in that time did we really start to begin to take on our physical form. And there are 3 stages. that Steiner develops later, also in relationship to the early childhood development in these three faculties of standing upright, in freeing our hands to do something in the world, and then learning to speak, being able to say something in the world, and then eventually being able to think with your culture. So these three faculties of doing, saying, and thinking are a recapitulation of these latter day times through the Lemurian and the Atlantean times to prepare us for this post-Atlantean time where we are coming into another form of being able to be individuated and then reawakened through the work that we've been talking about in the etheric, the astral, and the ego bodies within ourselves. So in many years, not so many years after these lectures, Steiner starts to develop the idea that when human beings evolved through consciousness entering into matter, and when we stood upright and freed our hands, there was a great sun being called the Christ who then participated in holding these faculties for the human being. So the Christ being is very involved in the evolution of consciousness. And through these deeds, when the human being evolved to the point of being able to stand upright, develop speech, and then eventually develop thinking, he says that that's when karma and reincarnation started in earthly evolution. So for people who may not be familiar with reincarnation or find it a bit of a challenging concept, in Steiner's philosophies, reincarnation is not something that was always there and will always be there. There's a particular time in earth evolution, and this particular time is now, where we are in a very material physical body, where we are veiled off from the spiritual perceptions, and we require the faculty of karma, which is a gift given to us by the spiritual world, to be able to develop and strengthen our work on the ennoblement of the human being. So at a certain point we've coalesced out of the great astral world. We are individuated now through the cycles of karma. We participate in the ennoblement and the ascent of the human being. And through these three ways of doing, of saying, and thinking, we participate in the process of karma in different ways. So again, we could have a very simple understanding of karma and say, when we do something, there's an action and it requires a reaction or a balancing act. Bad acts require certain balancing. We have to come back to places where we've done things and create a balancing act of forgiveness or reparation between people. But here in this particular lecture, Steiner talks about how we participate in karma in very different ways. So when we do something with our hands, so when we've stood upright and we're holding our hands free to do things, that is where we are participating in our personal karma. So we could say action and reaction is very clear about how that. But when we speak, we're no longer just participating in the world personally. When we speak, we are participating through a folk spirit. So everything that we speak, how we speak, the language we speak, the cliches we use, we're actually participating in the karma of a people. And then as the third level, when we learn to think, he says that's when we are starting to work on the karma of humanity. So the moment when the first sound was pronounced, the karma of humanity began in the world. The whole of humanity is living in what we speak. A language can never be entirely selfish, whereas the deeds performed by the hands are mostly so. We say, what I do with my hands can be my own concern simply. When I speak as a member of a nation or a tribe. So we have personal karma and we have general human karma, and then eventually we also participate at a higher level in what we think as well. So every thought that we bring about, we participate. So he says here, we differentiate 3 stages. The first consists in external deeds brought about through the hands. The second is brought about what is spoken in the word. And the third is what is brought about through thought. Thought is no longer, as with the language, different among the different peoples, but that belongs to the whole of humanity. So when we think, we start to think along with our whole humanity. And there are certain traditions, one being the Christian community, but other traditions that when we cross over the threshold, we are given the admonition or the reminder to know that we are beholden for all we think, say, and do. So this is how we participate karmically. Not all our thoughts and our words and our deeds have the same level of impact in the karmic workings of the transformation of the world. So that's a kind of a bit of a differentiation, that these three things that a small child before the age of 3 recapitulate in standing upright, in being able to learn to speak in the 2nd year, and then in the 3rd year being able to think for themselves after, to actually think what they speak, are ways that we participate in picking up our karma, one through our personal karma, but also through our folk, and then our general humanity, but also what we do in that realm participates in the further ennoblement and transformation in the evolution of consciousness. Might be a bit overwhelming as a thing to sort of think that everything we think, everything we say, everything we do participates in the future formation of the world. So now that's the sort of the one level of commentary that I wanted to bring in here, was, you know, the work of the Christ in the human being, in our pre-earthly lives, in ancient history. The Christ is the impulse that is the I am within the human being, and these faculties that we have as a human being to stand upright, to speak, to think, and then through that, in drawing the consequences of our actions, which is known as the karma of our action, we participate, the consequences of those things participate in the future evolution of the world as well. So for better and for worse, obviously. I mean, we can't always be just doing good things, but when we do bad things, we obviously have to come around again and help balance those deeds. So our personal, our general humanity, and our full humanity in the realms of thinking, speaking, and doing. But now there is another realm of work. We will come back to that, obviously, with the ideas of how the Christ works in these more recent times. Some people might not think going back into Atlantis or the Lemurian times is that recent, but when we look at the large scale of time frames that I gave at the beginning of the talk, and we've been looking at, it is very recent that we are in the most physical, most mineral, most material, most physical part of evolution, and that as we ennoble it, we will be able to lift the veils through our thinking, our saying, and our doing, through our relationships, as we've spoken about, through our understanding, our scientific understanding of the world. We start to build them into our capacity to participate in the evolution of the world. But now there is an interesting question placed here, is, if we are determined so much by karma, is there such a thing as a free deed? Where would the impetus for a free deed come? And here he says in this lecture something for us to consider. He says that there are two opposites, karma and the creation out of nothing. Now, the creation out of nothing may not be a concept a lot of people know, but if you have a sort of a church background, the creation out of nothing is a well thought over, well considered concept that, when the world was created, was it created out of substance? Was something already there? Or did it come from nothing? And Rudolf Steiner says that for a deed to be free, including the free deed of creation of our earth and the human being, it must come out of nothing. And in the Eastern esoteric world, that is known as Nirvana. And when asked for a word, a Western word for Nirvana, he says that at this point there is no corresponding or relevant word that can explain the place of nirvana, but it is a place of moral content. And he talks about where can we create a free deed, and he says, many of our deeds are done out of the past, out of karma, when we love each other. There's a lot of things that determine our action that come out of the past. But a free deed, he says, anyone wishing to work for the future must, however, have those thoughts which will produce new connections between one thing and another. As I said in the last lecture, he was speaking about how the organs for higher perception come out of relationships that are built on spiritual connection rather than blood connection and karmic connection. But these places where we foster relationships that build this connection, where we produce a new connection between one thing and another. And he says the places that we can be driven or draw these things are, for example, is through art, through religion, through the study of world history, where we start to build connections between things, between people, out of a way. He calls this the moral intuitions. So, for example, we can bring about new duties between people through a moral intuition by bringing a new relationship between things that are not just there out of the karmic. So the moral action consists in deeds brought about by a relationship based on goodwill, for example. And this is a huge concept. This is a huge thing to take into one's ideas about action. That we have certain actions that are driven and drive karma in our thinking, our thinking, our speaking, and our doing. So we are beholden for all that we think, say, and do. And that is where we participate in our karmic relationships in the world out of the past, building a future. But we also can consider that if we want to build something into the future substantiality of evolution, we need to find deeds in our thinking, our speaking, and our doing that are built out of, are created out of nothing. So they're not based upon past, but they are based out of the future. So out of the art, out of the religious, out of the consideration of world history, we can find motivations that are not karmic and not blood related, and therefore start to begin to create moral intuitions that allow a free deed. So, and this goes all the way up to the creation of our universe. So the creator gods of our solar system, right back to ancient Saturn, comes out of the creation of nothing, comes out of a dreaming of the future rather than a causality of the past. So that might be something to consider in your own life. Where do you actually do a free deed? When in any given day is it possible to, in this respect, that you do a free deed? There might be quite a few actually. I mean, the people that we love, we're not only relating out of our karma and our past, but we also do things out of a created duty or an artistic relationship to each other, something that isn't just derived from the past. So one can bring about a conscious relationship in one's deeds through the thinking, through the ideas, the moral intuitions that we bring, and create a task together that isn't based upon blood or karma. There are people who take up tasks in the world that are free deeds that are not based upon past relationship. So very interesting thought. What is this? The creation out of nothing. Something that is really an idea, a moral concept, a moral idea, or a spiritual idea that is drawn out of, as he says, the realm of Nirvana in the Eastern esoteric world, which at this point in his lectures he says there isn't a Western concept for. So I'm just repeating myself again, mainly because I can see other people joining the group. But yeah, so there's some thoughts for this lecture. We now passed the midpoint, 15 more to go. Maybe by then we'll all be able to relate more freely and not just via these things. But I'm enjoying reworking this whole lecture cycle in this way by having to give little talks. So thank you very much for participating. I'll see you again in a few days.